Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. We continue with the legacy of Ali radiallahu anhu, but there is a continuation with this particular incident and the latter part of Ali radiallahu anhu and his life with what happened with Uthman radiallahu anhu. We had mentioned the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu, and because of this particular incident and this haditha that took place with Uthman radiallahu anhu, there was a rage within inside the Muslims at the time, and the Muslims, they fell apart into many groups, and some of the Muslims wanted complete revenge from the murderers or the individuals who had murdered Uthman radiallahu anhu. So we find that Abdullah ibn Saba, he became very successful as a Jewish man to infiltrate the Muslims and to be able to poison the young minds and to create rebels within inside the Muslims, to go against the Khulafa, to go against the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these conspiracies continued, and these conflicts continued. And we found the fact that even although it may be hard to understand how the Muslims managed to believe these rumors to such an extent, but we find the fact that there were amongst the Muslims at the time those individuals that supported the idea that Ali radiallahu anhu has been oppressed and he was meant to be the Khalifa at the time. And we also find individuals that believe the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu, his relationship with the previous Khulafa, the likes of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu, as well as Uthman radiallahu anhu, wasn't a real relationship. They rather believed the fact that this relationship was being forced upon Ali radiallahu anhu. But these were obvious lies, but this was a picture that was being seen from a distance, meaning that the empire of the Muslims had extended far and wide at the time, especially with the battles that took place in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu over Persia and the fire worshippers at the time. The enmity against the Muslims grew day by day, and we could understand in the beginning of Islam that this was a very hard time upon the Muslims. But we find the fact that these individuals grew in number, where they wanted the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu needs to be supported, and they felt the fact that he was being oppressed. And Abdullah ibn Saba, he took advantage of this particular time when the Muslims had taken over the Persian Empire, and the individuals from this empire had joined in with this individual Abdullah ibn Saba, and they had continued to plot and create plans to go against the Muslims and to further break them down. So we find the fact that even although this situation had occurred, but to look at the reality on ground, we see the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu and his relationship with the companions was fine. There was no problem. And we mentioned yesterday, even to the extent where we find Ali radiallahu anhu had given his daughter Kulthum to Umar radiallahu anhu in marriage. But again, the individuals who were plotting and planning, the likes of Abdullah ibn Saba, the Jewish man, as well as the Persian army and the ones that were defeated, they had increased these rumors to say the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu was forced into this. So we find that the fitan, these trials and these problems had increased over the time. But regardless, from looking at it on a reality aspect, we find the fact that the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would turn to Ali radiallahu anhu for all types of advice, and they would turn to him for any matters of religion, because they found that Ali radiallahu anhu was a strong individual, deep in his knowledge, was very profound in his understanding of the deen at the time. And when it came to executing justice and wisdom, we find that Ali radiallahu anhu was always at the forefront. We also see the fact that there's no problem amongst the companions, even to the extent that Ali radiallahu anhu was sent to Yemen to preach and to give rulings with regards to Islamic affairs and so forth. One of the things we find is the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu was a very strong individual, an individual that wanted justice, an individual that wouldn't be afraid if something was to come against him. To the extent where, even although at the time when Ali radiallahu anhu did become the Khalifa, and there was a governor who was also involved in this particular incident, there was also an individual who was a Jewish man who claimed the fact that the coat of arms belonged to himself when they actually belonged to Ali radiallahu anhu. And when this argument broke within themselves, even although Ali radiallahu anhu, he's a leader, he's a Khalifa of the Muslims, he has such a strong position, and he could take this individual away from himself and make him disappear if he wanted. But we find the fact that when this when he claimed the fact that this coat of arms belongs to myself and rather not to Ali radiallahu anhu, and Ali radiallahu anhu, he had with him his two sons as well as Rafi', who was an individual who was with him at the time, who witnessed this whole thing, saying the fact that the coat of arms belongs to Ali radiallahu anhu and not to this Jewish man. But the whole case went to court. When it went to court, we find the fact that because these witnesses were from the family of Ali radiallahu anhu, they weren't accepted, and the judge at the time gave the ruling the fact that the right belongs to the Jewish man and the coat of arms belongs to him and it should be given to him. At that time, we see the fact that the Jewish individual, he became a Muslim due to the justice that was being placed and executed within the land of the Muslims at the time. And because of this, the Jewish man had taken the coat of arms and he returned it to Ali radiallahu anhu. But it's mentioned in history the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu, he returned this to the Jewish man, saying the fact that this is a present to yourself. One of the other things to bear in mind is the courage of carrying the banner when it came to Ali radiallahu anhu. And just to give you the virtues of this individual, who the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the battle of Khaybar broke between the Muslims and the Jews, and this is in the north of Medina, we find the fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had said that the banner, meaning the flag, will be carried or will be given to an individual tomorrow who loves Allah and he loves His Messenger. And they, meaning Allah and His Messenger, also love him. And he is a man who never flees from the battlefield. And everyone hoped the fact that they will be granted this honor. But rather, when the tomorrow came, we find that Ali radiallahu anhu was the individual that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was speaking about. So when the battle time came and the time of Khaybar came, Ali radiallahu anhu was called and honored with carrying that battle, and it was labeled as the fact that he is a man who loves Allah and His Prophet, and Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also love him in return. The simplicity with regards to Ali radiallahu anhu was found in his words, in his dress code, as well as in his household, that we find the fact that he was a very simple individual, that he would also dress very simple, inexpensive. He wouldn't eat with extravagance. He would make sure of the fact that he was always humble. And this was a characteristic found amongst many of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is noted the fact that he was an individual who was fierce in fighting during the day, and the people would tremble with his justice and his sword, but at the same time he was devout when he would worship during the night. So one of the things that's been quoted is some of the words of wisdom that are found with Ali radiallahu anhu, and some of the words quoted here is that a man should never expect anything save from his Lord, meaning the fact that a man should not expect that anything should be hidden from Allah Azza wa Jal, and he should have no fear except from his sins. And a man who lacks knowledge should not shy away from asking about what he does not know, and a man of learning should never be too shy to admit his ignorance by saying that Allah knows best. So these are some of the advice that we find with Ali radiallahu anhu given to the general people. So he should always know the fact that Allah is watching him, and he should always fear his sins, for they will be in question on the Day of Judgment. And an individual should never shy away from asking somebody from that which he does not know, and he should not shy away from something that which he does not know about to say the fact that Allah knows best about it, rather than just speaking on and presuming the fact or giving the picture that the people think the fact that this person is a man of knowledge, but rather just to say Allah knows best is something that's been given as advice. Patience and perseverance are to faith like the head to the body. So two things he is given to us, that patience or perseverance. To be patient, to have sabr, and to have istimrar fil amr. To be continuous upon something, it's the head of one's faith. And we find the fact that if a person does not have these two things, if he doesn't have the patience to deal with things, and if he's not continuous upon the manhaj or the goal that he wants to achieve, then he will not be complete in his faith. How did Ali radiallahu anhu pass away, and what were the last stages of his life like? Ali radiallahu anhu, we mentioned that after the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu, we find that the individuals continued to plot and plan against the Muslim nation at the time. And we find that the head of this plan was the Jewish man Abdullah ibn Saba, who had created these rumors amongst the Muslims at the time. And we said the fact that there were rebels now created who were known as the Khawarij of the time. And we also have them present even today, where we have individuals who rebel against their rulers, and they are known as the Khawarij. And these individuals at the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, what they did was they would forge letters, and they would make up commands against the ruler Uthman radiallahu anhu, against Ali radiallahu anhu, where they, or even Aisha radiallahu anha, as well as Talha radiallahu anhu. And these letters that would be forged, they would be the likes of the fact that Uthman radiallahu anhu has commanded for the beheading of some Muslims that are righteous. So the likes of these things intensified the hatred within the Muslims at the time, especially the ones that were coming not from within the city of Medina or Mecca, but rather these were individuals that had newly come to Islam. These were individuals that were towards Sham, these were individuals towards Iraq and Kufa, that these rumors had spread as far wide as that. And these were individuals that were coming from those places wanting revenge, and eventually they managed to kill Uthman radiallahu anhu, and we mentioned that he was around 80 years of age, and they managed to kill him. And after that, in these unfortunate circumstances, we find Ali radiallahu anhu was chosen as the Khalifa of the Muslims after the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu. At this particular point, we find that the Muslims divided into two groups. That there were Muslims that were loyal to Ali radiallahu anhu, and they said the fact that all rights are with Ali radiallahu anhu. But then not the fact that the second group had any problem with Ali radiallahu anhu being a Khalifa, but their problem was slightly different. What they wanted was the fact that there needs to be justice done with the individual, with Uthman radiallahu anhu. So the individuals who killed Uthman radiallahu anhu, they need to be murdered, they need to be killed. So this was the case with these two groups. So there was the first individuals who were with Ali radiallahu anhu and supported him excessively, and then there were individuals amongst the companions who said the fact that we want the revenge against the individuals who killed Uthman radiallahu anhu. So these two individuals, they were growing in number, but the stance that Ali radiallahu anhu he took with the individuals who are wanting revenge, that he said to them the fact that we want these individuals who killed Uthman radiallahu anhu to be tried first, that we cannot just go about killing individuals, but rather we need to try them, we need to take them to court, and through the court system that we need to either execute these individuals or put them to whatever punishment that the court decides. So from this, that even although there was already growing misconceptions against the Muslims at the time, the rumors were spreading fast, that one's not for this, one's against this, and Ali radiallahu anhu is changing his position with the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu. There was so much confusion within this particular time that even the ones that were wanting justice for the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu misinterpreted and misunderstood even these commands of Ali radiallahu anhu. And we find the fact that they wanted this revenge, but because of these statements of Ali radiallahu anhu, they took it in the wrong manner at the time. So from this particular point, we find the fact that these battles took place between the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now we find the fact that all of them, Allah Azza wa Jalla is pleased with them. Or rather, we should not point fingers and say one was this or one was that. This is not for us to say. This is not for us to complain or to say something or anything bad against the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is to be understood is that how individuals who were not within Islam infiltrated into Islam and managed to split and break the ummah. This is a lesson to be taken. And how fitan and rumors that are spread within inside the Muslims amongst other individuals who are not part of the Muslim society, how it creates a friction and creates fitan to the extent where killing can also occur. So we have three individuals. So we had individuals with Ali radiallahu anhu, then we had individuals with the governor of Syria at the time, who was also part of the Muslim empire, and we also had individuals with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. So these three individuals now had conflicted amongst themselves, and the conflicting was very much particular to remind ourselves it's due to the death of Uthman radiallahu anhu. And it's due to the fact that we need to take revenge for those individuals who killed Uthman radiallahu anhu. But at this time, we understand the fact that the armies had reached towards Medina, and Medina armies were going towards Iraq, and these two armies were coming together just for the sake of the fact that they were thinking that Ali radiallahu anhu, he's giving safe haven to these individuals, that he's not putting them to trial, he's not going to command any justice for these individuals. But the position of Ali radiallahu anhu was very clear, the fact that we should not just give them out to be killed, but rather it should be the fact that we should trial them properly before anything happens. So Ali radiallahu anhu was in justice correct, and other individuals who had the intention of seeking justice were also correct in their manner. So we find the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha, who was the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she became afraid the fact that these armies coming together will cause a lot of bloodshed amongst the Muslims. So Aisha radiallahu anha, she went with other companions, major companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she went to Iraq to stop these two armies coming together. But at this moment, we find the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu, he stopped Aisha radiallahu anha, and they joined together and understood the fact that there is no conflict between them. That there is no conflict between them and there is no fight between them. And they understood the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu, he wants the same thing, and the individuals that came with Aisha radiallahu anha, they want the same thing. So there is no conflict. And at that time, they agreed the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha, she would return back to Medina, and she would return back with the companions that she came, and they will return without any bad intention. So we find that this battle was named as a Battle of Camel, the Battle of Jamal, and at that moment of time we saw the fact that there was success found with Aisha radiallahu anha returning back to Medina at that time. But again, due to this conflict, it did lead to trouble, and Aisha radiallahu anha, she regretted going to Iraq at that time, meaning she should not have gone to Iraq at that time. Another battle which took place was the Battle of Siffin, where we find the fact that now the army again was with Muawiyah radiallahu anha, and Ali radiallahu anhu, he had his army with him at that time, and these two individuals had sent two major companions to reconcile. And from the two major companions we find Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, as well as Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhu, who represented Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu. So we find the fact that they were major companions. But this time the fact that what did occur was the fact that when these two individuals did come together to reconcile between Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu and Ali radiyallahu anhu, that these two parties left the battleground. They moved away from this. But at this particular time, we do not forget that there were individuals amongst the Khawarij, and there were individuals who would follow Abdullah ibn Saba, the Jewish man. And there were individuals from the Persian army who had also infiltrated amongst the Muslims. So there is a conflict, even although the major companions had backed off from this conflict. We find the fact that in that duration of that night, when this also occurred, we find that the Khawarij, who are the rebels, as we even find even in the Ummah today, that there are rebels and Khawarij amongst the Ummah. At that time, these individuals called out to the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even some of them calling out to Ali radiyallahu anhu, the Khalifa of the Mu'mineen. They called them out to be non-Muslims, to say the fact that they are ruling and they are doing things against Islam. So what they did was the fact that they came together in numbers to attack the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at this time it was the Ali radiallahu anhu fought them, and there was victory with Ali radiallahu anhu. And we call them misguided Khawarij due to the fact that these rumors had infiltrated into their minds, and they had this misconception with regards to Ali radiallahu anhu. But this does not stop. Even although the Khawarij were, killed, but there were still amongst them number of individuals left. Okay, so we know the fact that there was an individual amongst them by the name of Abdurrahman ibn Muljim, and we find the fact that this individual, they planned the fact that they would now kill Ali radiallahu anhu. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he went for Fajr one morning, and we find that this Abdurrahman ibn Muljim, he came from behind and he stabbed Ali radiallahu anhu from behind, and this wound of his, because of it, he died after it by a couple of days. So we find from this the fact that the era of the Khulafa al-Rashideen, the four righted, guided Khalifas, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the Ahadith, ended with this note. And it was a sad occasion, knowing the fact that the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, being very strong at that time, and being very dedicated and loyal and very just at the time, that due to the enemies of Islam at the time, and infiltrating and spreading rumors amongst the Muslims, and how it destructed many foundations of the Muslims at the time. And I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to allow us to seek lessons from these history lessons, and I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to allow us to follow in footstep of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين.